They framed me, they fired me, and that's how they ended up in a mess of a divorce, a prison sentence, and a few deportations. This tale is longer than it seems, but if you stick with it, you will discover how I was wrongly accused and dismissed from my job, ultimately sparking a series of events that led to a complete overhaul of the staff. This included the firing of several managers, the removal of the general manager, who ended up getting divorced, and one manager facing investigation by the FBI, which led to his arrest, not to mention a number of co-workers being deported. Let me take you back to when I worked at an upscale restaurant, part of a large corporate group that owned several different dining brands. I was employed at this restaurant for about 3.5 years before I was eventually let go. But before I get into that part of the story, it's important to explain the role I held during my time there. I started as a server, but from day one, I was eager to learn as much as I could about the different departments. I was persistent in my requests to management whenever I wanted to learn something new. Over time, I took on multiple roles, such as carryout, hosting, bartending, bar backing, banquets, catering, and deliveries. My main goal while working there was to secure as many hours as possible. At first, I was paid about $12 an hour, and that amount changed depending on whether I was bartending or serving, which came with tips. Eventually, my work caught the attention of management, and they decided to promote me to an unofficial supervisor role, overseeing the team involved in carryout, catering, and deliveries. While this was a step up, I realized it might lead to fewer hours since I would now focus on just one department. To balance this change, I successfully negotiated a pay increase of $1.50, reflecting the added responsibilities. I wasn't trying to squeeze every dollar out of them, I simply needed enough to cover my bills and have some fun afterward. Living in Chicago, a city known for its high taxes, alongside being in the already expensive state of Illinois, made it tough to make ends meet. Yet, I was a person who found happiness in simple pleasures. I could spend months, even years, enjoying a single video game. I also had a pet that I brought with me to Chicago, which added to my expenses. Not long after I settled into my role as the unofficial supervisor, I began dating someone, which led to more outings and spending, but with smart budgeting, I managed to afford all of this without a major issue. However, the management at the restaurant had a high turnover rate, meaning that new managers frequently came in without understanding the department's needs or recognizing the importance of hours for workers. Eventually, whispers began circulating that our current general manager was on his way out, and a new one was to be brought in. This incoming general manager was touted as a superstar in the restaurant industry, someone who would turn things around. We decided to look him up, expecting to find glowing reviews of his work ethic and skills. Instead, the first result we found was a mugshot in a police report detailing his history of domestic abuse. This was a crucial piece of information that would play a significant role later on. When this new manager, whom we will refer to as Harvey, arrived, he wasted no time making changes. One of our best managers resigned, refusing to work with him. She warned us, almost prophetically, to brace ourselves for a wave of sexual harassment, misogynistic comments, and, ultimately, for Harvey to ruin the restaurant. As expected, Harvey began replacing our existing managers with people he had previously worked with, further rocking the stability of our workplace. In the past, he had worked with various managers, but eventually, nearly all of them were replaced. The only one who remained was the kitchen manager, whom we will refer to as Frito. Frito had been with the company since I started working there, and he had an interesting way of adjusting his values and ethics to fit the expectations of whoever was in charge at the time. While I can appreciate his ability to adapt for survival, I ultimately viewed him as someone who lacked integrity and loyalty to the team. Harvey, our higher-up, never really replaced the manager specifically for our department. This left our operations with minimal oversight, unless my role as supervisor is considered significant. Without someone constantly monitoring our work, we found a level of freedom in how we ran things. Although our department did encounter some challenges from time to time, we succeeded in maintaining smooth operations. Because we didn't have a dedicated manager to consult, we often needed to radio for a manager to assist us with tasks that required approval. Frito, being the closest manager from the kitchen, would typically respond to these requests. Over time, the new group of managers began to see Frito as the unofficial manager for our department, even though the hourly team that worked closely together still regarded me as their true supervisor. This created a challenging dynamic, as whenever Frito attempted to implement changes that could negatively impact our team, the hourly workers relied on me to step in and either negotiate on their behalf or prevent potential issues from arising. Frito and I found ourselves clashing repeatedly, particularly over the importance of scheduled hours for the team members in our department. He seemed to think that our team should be living off of tips, similar to servers, forgetting that most of our orders were takeout. These orders primarily came through Grubhub, where tips were virtually non-existent. Our delivery orders generally yielded minimal tips, perhaps $10 on a lucky day, but splitting such a small amount among 4 people wasn't practical, highlighting Frito's lack of understanding regarding our situation. Eventually, a meeting was scheduled that included Harvey, Frito, and all the team members from our department. This meeting was marketed as an opportunity to express any grievances or concerns about the changes the management wanted to make, with a promise of no retaliation. The workers took this chance to voice their frustrations, particularly focusing on Frito's attempts to cut hours despite not being our direct manager. When it was mentioned that they were considering hiring someone to manage our department, the team suggested that I take on that role, as I had already been supervising them effectively for several months. The management had consulted with me regarding scheduling, because I understood the availability of team members based on their school or family commitments. At that moment, I noticed a significant change in the atmosphere when the suggestion was made. Harvey and Frito exchanged glances that indicated to me that they had made a decision on the spot, one that involved removing me from my position. Though they did not vocalize this plan, their look communicated everything I needed to know. I felt a sinking realization that my time at that job was limited and that I would soon be let go, regardless of how it might happen. During that meeting, they made several promises to the team about not cutting hours. They assured us that they would stop the practice of sending all but one person home early, which left that one person with the burden of cleaning and closing by themselves. Given that our department was not small, this was an unreasonable expectation. They assured us that whatever hours we were scheduled to work, we would indeed work. We aimed to be reasonable in our requests, explaining to them that we'd usually have 3 or 4 staff members scheduled to work in our department. While we acknowledged that they could cut 2 of them early, we emphasized the need for at least 2 workers to be on hand to close properly. A commitment was made that we would always have at least 2 closers available. However, only about a week later, they reverted to their previous approach, sending all but one person home early each night. One particular night, they attempted to do this while I was scheduled as the closer. It was a hectic time, as we had just returned from a large catering event, and the workload was heavier than usual. The cleanup task ahead of me seemed almost insurmountable. I watched as Frito entered the room and suggested that everyone but me should clock out and go home. Understanding the mountain of work that was left to be done, I took a stand. I confronted him directly, reminding him that he had made a commitment to us during our previous meeting. His response was blunt. He looked me straight in the eye and told me to stop complaining. He added that if I continued to challenge him about his promises, he could easily replace me and find someone else to fill my shift. It was clear to me that this was an attempt to undermine my position at the company. Frito wanted me to push further, to make a fuss, but I recognized his strategy and decided it was best to back off. I turned my focus to cleaning, tackling the numerous tasks that lay before me. As a result of the excessive work, I ended up staying far beyond my scheduled hours. Although this meant I would earn overtime pay, it came with its own complications. Company policy strictly stated that we were not allowed to work overtime without prior approval from a manager. When I was later written up for it, I refused to sign the document. I explained my situation to Frito, emphasizing that I had let him know I couldn't manage all the cleanup duties by myself within the constraints of my shift. I was eventually allowed to leave without signing the write-up, but this was only because the human resources representative present was not aligned with Frito's group. Fast forward to the day I was terminated. It's worth noting that I had a routine of arriving at work an hour early, especially given the high cost of living in Chicago. Our workplace offered unlimited free soup and bread, making it a convenient choice for my lunches. On this particular day, I entered the kitchen to grab a bowl of soup when one of the line cooks told me he had a dish that had been cancelled by a customer. He explained that Frito had instructed him to give it away, and assured me that it had already been comped. As luck would have it, the dish was my favorite appetizer, so I happily accepted it. Not long after I settled into my booth with the food, both Harvey and Frito approached me. They inquired whether I had placed an order for the meal. I explained that the line cook had given it to me, stating it was a cancelled order that Frito had already covered. Frito's expression changed to one of disbelief, and he insisted he had no knowledge of what I was referring to. Harvey chimed in, telling me that I was committing theft. He instructed me to finish my food and leave the establishment immediately. I attempted to clarify the situation, offering to take them to the kitchen to speak with the line cook, but by the time we arrived, he had already left for the day. Faced with no other option, I gathered my belongings, bid farewell to my co-workers, and prepared to leave. As I walked out, I recounted the entire incident to my colleagues who were on shift that afternoon. They expressed shock, anger, and sadness at the news of my departure. On my way to the accounting office to collect any tips owed to me, I felt an instinctive urge to record the moment. I discreetly set my phone to record and placed it in my pocket, even though the video would likely turn out black due to the angle. However, I hoped to capture something valuable. As I walked past the closed office door, I could hear Harvey and Frito discussing their plans, revealing that they had been trying to dismiss me since our earlier meeting. When I knocked on the door, their conversation quickly hushed. They opened the door and asked what I was still doing there. I calmly requested my tips, and they gathered the contents from the safe and handed them to me. Despite my rising frustration from what I had just overheard, I resolved to keep the situation civil for the moment. I extended my hand for a shake, thanked them for the opportunity to work at the restaurant, and made my exit. Before leaving, I pulled my phone from my pocket, ensuring to record the exterior of the restaurant, capturing its name and logo as a final reminder of my time there. With a sign clearly displaying its name and logo while operating in a restaurant, an important lesson learned is the necessity of always safeguarding oneself. This principle applies to many jobs, but in this particular instance, there was an instinctive feeling that preparations were essential, especially if accusations of theft were to arise. The goal was to create a foundation of proof against any such claims that could potentially surface during future job interviews, which is exactly the scenario I found myself in. After receiving the news of my termination during a train ride home, the situation escalated rapidly. I took immediate action by sending out messages and posting in various local Facebook groups to announce that I had just been let go and was urgently seeking new employment. By the time the train reached my stop, I had successfully arranged an interview for later that same day. In fact, during the interview, I was offered a position within just 5 minutes. However, as the conversation progressed and I learned more about the job, it became clear that it wasn't a good fit for me, so I decided to decline the offer. Continuing my job search, I interviewed at a few additional companies, ultimately discovering a position that was an excellent match for my skills. This new role came with a substantial pay increase compared to my previous job, and importantly, it involved no direct customer interaction since it was an auditing position for a logistics company. During my interview with the manager for this role, he informed me that he had already reached out to my former employer and had spoken with the general manager, Harvey. To my dismay, Harvey had given him the false information that I had been fired for theft. Fortunately, the manager, who I began to refer to as Dean, was interested in hearing my side of the story. He encouraged me to provide proof of my innocence, allowing me to pull out my phone to retrieve a recording I had made. I asked him if the voice he heard during his call with Harvey was the same as the one in my recording. It was. This confirmation was all Dean needed to know that I wasn't fabricating anything. He listened intently as the two managers in the video explicitly stated that they had set me up. Furthermore, when I displayed the front of the restaurant in the video, showcasing its name and logo, Dean was convinced. He hired me on the spot and requested that I send him the recording, which I did, believing that this chapter had concluded. However, about 7 months later, after becoming comfortable in my new job, the Human Resources Department sent out a welcome email to introduce the latest members of the team. This email included photographs and some background information about each new hire. One of the names on the list was Thomas, a former co-worker from the restaurant where I had worked. We had shared a camaraderie at the host stand, so I was delighted to see a familiar face joining the team. Curious about his departure from the restaurant, I approached his desk to greet him and inquire about the reasons for his exit. Thomas explained that he hadn't left voluntarily, he had been laid off due to an ongoing investigation into the restaurant chain. What had initially seemed like a minor issue had escalated significantly when the corporate parent company received an email containing a video recorded from inside my pocket. This revelation prompted corporate to conduct an internal investigation. Thomas was surprised to learn that I had not been informed of these events, as there had been multiple attempts to contact me regarding my employment and termination. Intrigued, I quickly logged into the old email account I had used when applying for the restaurant job. To my astonishment, there were at least 24 emails requesting my presence to discuss my termination. I hadn't replied to any of them, I simply didn't care anymore. Additionally, I had changed my phone number since leaving, so they had been unable to reach me that way as well. Thomas continued to explain that prior to corporate's investigation, Harvey and another manager, Frito, had conspired to offer my former co-workers a small pay raise in exchange for spinning a false narrative about my alleged incompetence. However, when the corporate auditor, whom I shall refer to as Audrey, arrived, several of my ex-co-workers abruptly quit in front of her, ensuring that they exposed Harvey and Frito's misconduct before leaving. This was strike one against both managers. A couple of days later, Audrey confronted Harvey and Frito with the recording that had initiated the whole debacle. Despite their vehement denials, there was no doubt about the truth of the situation. Harvey's voice was unmistakable, filled with a strong intensity that left no room for doubt. It had a unique quality that lingered in the air. The video clearly captured not just Harvey's voice but also the voices of others, including mine, during a moment when we shook hands and parted ways amicably. This seemingly pleasant interaction was something they had boasted about to Audrey, believing it painted them in a favorable light. Their assertion was that parting on good terms somehow reflected better on them, but this was just a facade. The real conflict arose later when it became evident that they could no longer work together harmoniously. Audrey took action by assigning Frito to another restaurant owned by our parent company and decided to temporarily demote Harvey to the role of manager. This decision effectively tore apart what had once been a strong partnership, one that could be characterized as a troubling alliance. The intense pressure of the ongoing investigation seemed to have pushed them to their breaking point. What followed was a public fallout that played out on Facebook, where they exchanged heated remarks. Though their post has since been deleted, Thomas provided an overview of the confrontation. In a company Facebook post, Frito had been featured, prompting Harvey to make a snide comment about Frito's presence, suggesting he had no business being in the picture since he had been reassigned due to misconduct. Frito, not one to back down, retaliated with a sharp comeback about how, at least, when people searched for his name online, he was not the one who appeared as the man who had assaulted his wife. This only escalated things further. Harvey shot back with a sarcastic remark that tried to highlight Frito's own alleged infidelity, referencing a woman named Janet, who, while not her real name, was the individual appointed to oversee my previous department after my dismissal. The argument continued, with Frito accusing Harvey of having made inappropriate advances towards several waitresses, stating that they all had stories about him behaving inappropriately. Before the matter could settle, the post caught the attention of Audrey, and this incident became what was referred to as Strike 2. The following day, Audrey commenced interviews with the female waitstaff and bartenders to gather information about Harvey's behavior. Each woman was interviewed separately, and many recounted similar experiences, stating that Harvey had made inappropriate advances toward them. The common thread in their testimonies was a disturbing offer from Harvey. He had proposed to be their sugar daddy in exchange for explicit photos or the chance to engage in intimate encounters after work hours. This abusive pattern led to Harvey's termination from the restaurant. However, the fallout did not end there. Audrey was not just any corporate auditor, she held the position of former regional manager for the area and had previously hired Harvey's wife as the general manager at another restaurant. Recognizing the gravity of the situation, she reached out to Harvey's wife to inform her about what had unfolded during the interviews. It was later revealed that this shocking news led to the couple's divorce, primarily because of Harvey's infidelity after his wife had already given him a second chance following a previous incident of domestic violence. The reasons behind her initial forgiveness remain unclear, but it was evident that she would not be extending a third chance. After Harvey's dismissal, an employee named Frito underwent an interview with Audrey. Somehow, during their conversation, Frito revealed that he was an illegal immigrant. Audrey had his employee file, which contained an Illinois ID and social security number, so this revelation raised suspicions. Intrigued, she sought further clarification. It turned out that Frito had connections leading back to a black market operation where he was involved in creating fake IDs and social security cards for illegal immigrants he employed at lower wages. This scheme had reportedly been ongoing for a minimum of 4 years, making it a serious felony and a potential public relations disaster. Realizing the magnitude of what she had uncovered, Audrey felt obligated to inform the authorities. The local police department was alerted, and the case escalated to involve the FBI, as some activities were beyond the jurisdiction of local law enforcement. Frito was arrested and, in subsequent interrogations, quickly divulged the names of individuals who had purchased fake IDs and social security numbers from him. While it's unclear if he disclosed all the names, he did mention approximately 14 people, and of those, at least half faced deportation by the time Thomas was terminated from his position. One of the people involved was the line cook who had served me the food on the day I got fired. Thomas explained that everything had started with my termination. However, I never forwarded the recording to corporate. I had only sent it to Dean when he hired me. When I asked Dean about it, he revealed that he had shared the recording with his wife, who happened to be a lawyer. He wanted her to review it to see if I had grounds to sue my previous employer, as their actions were clearly wrong. Dean also reminded me that, during our initial conversation, I had said that I wasn't the kind of person who would try to make millions by taking down an entire company over the mistakes of just 2 people. At the same time, I had also mentioned that it would be satisfying to see them lose their jobs for what they did to me. As it turns out, Dean's wife had sent the recording to the legal team at the corporate headquarters of my former job. Dean showed it to his wife, and she forwarded it to the higher-ups. Their intention was merely to hold 2 individuals accountable for their mistreatment of me, but things spiraled far beyond that. The small action ended up unraveling a much bigger thread. It led to revelations of sexual harassment accusations, managers cheating on their spouses with people they had helped promote, a divorce, mass layoffs, ongoing investigations, and a complete staff overhaul. The situation even caught the attention of the FBI, which launched an investigation into potential black market activities, including the falsification of government-issued documents. There were also at least 6 deportations, though the number could be as high as 14. I'm not sure if this qualifies as nuclear revenge, since I didn't intentionally pursue it. But Thomas showed me that, even if it wasn't planned as revenge, the fallout was certainly nuclear, leaving behind a massive crater in its wake.